I'm going to keep my video on until I hear from you that I'm cutting out, because I know that has kind of been the experience. So please feel free to interrupt me if I start to cut out or you can't hear me, and I will turn my video off. Thanks for being here. I know it's been a long year, and it's been a long time since we've seen each other. So I'm Krista Carson. I am the Elementary Coordinator of Curriculum and Instruction, and I am one of the co-chairs of this strategic plan. My partner, Christopher Villarreal, is going to be joining us here shortly, but I will go ahead and get us started. Pam Palermo, thank you for having your camera on. Can you give me a thumbs up that you can hear and I'm not cutting out for you? Awesome. Okay. Again, please feel free to cut out, cut me, interrupt me, tell me you can't hear me. All right, so people are slowly coming in. I mentioned earlier, I'm super thankful that you're here today. The first thing I'm going to do is I am going to drop in our presentation into the chat. I kind of want to wait to see if anyone else joins us, because I think sometimes the link when you join late isn't seen by everyone. So I will drop that in. The main reason I'm going to put that in the chat right now is that there are some links that we're going to ask you to touch on here shortly, so I wanted you to have access to that. So I will drop that in, and then I will begin to share my screen. So there is, I just dropped the link to the presentation into the chat so that you would have that going forward, and you will have access to some of the things we'll need tonight. So let me start to share my screen, and again, hopefully I do not cut out as we do that, and add a little more load to the system. So it's been a while since we've been together, and so we wanted to just kind of do a little quick recap of where we left off when we were so abruptly interrupted in our year last year. And so I just want to kind of remind the whole purpose of us being here, and the reason we're together is, and what's driving our work is for that every student will have a personalized learning plan, and that plan is going to support them in being college and career ready. And also along the way, they're going to have those interpersonal skills that are important in being successful. So that is our ultimate goal, and the reason we are here, and the reason we're doing some of the work that we're doing. And that should be in the back of our minds as we kind of move forward. Something that we did when we first started together, we came up with some norms. And I think since it's been such a long time since we've seen each other and since we've been together, and then especially now that we are doing this virtual, which makes a whole nother situation for us and adds some challenges and some barriers maybe at times, we want to make sure that we kind of remember what we agreed to. And that is that we're going to remain actively engaged, and virtually that's sometimes hard to do, but just sticking with us. We're going to have some breakout rooms a little bit later, so hopefully we can have some interaction with each other and talk with one another. And then also just to remain that positive, and we're solution oriented as we work through some of these tasks that we have before us. We want to be careful about our acronyms and our educational jargon, because we have all kinds of members on our team that may and may not have some of the language that we use so frequently in education. And then please, 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 please do not hesitate to reach out, ask questions, ask others to help provide more clarification when you're not understanding or can't kind of grasp something that we're discussing. I will be really honest right now. I am terrible about following the chat. So again, please do not hesitate to just interrupt and ask a question if you feel comfortable doing that. If not, once Christopher comes, we'll be able to tag team that, and support that chat piece. So again, I just want to put that out there so you don't think I'm ignoring you if you do put something in the chat. Again, finally, we're going to focus on those things we can control. We're going to try to keep things moving. We really struggled with whether to do this meeting virtually after school or after our work hours for a few hours, or whether we wanted to try and do something more or longer at another time. And so it's just really hard to keep things moving in this virtual reality. And so we're going to do our best to make tonight really productive so that we can end well and have a really great path going forward. We're really doing well in this particular action plan. We've hit some major steps, and so I'll show you where we're going next. And then I want to make sure, again, I'm kind of taking over right now, but you will have opportunities to share and talk and provide your input. So we really want that from everyone, because everyone has great things and great experiences to offer to help us build this system. All right, so what are we doing? We are actually that strategy 4. Our goal is we are part of a larger that strategy 4. Our action is part of the larger system, and that is our goal is to design systems that support our mission. Our specific action is to implement a district-wide response to intervention system so that we can ensure all of our students have social, emotional, and academic growth so that they can achieve their personal excellence. So that is our goal. We're actually part of a bigger plan in Strategy 4. So Strategy 4 includes some other systems that are being designed and developed. And so we're a small part of that, designing and developing our system for response to intervention. So that is our place that we are heading. As you all know, as a reminder, we have some very outlined action steps that we are responsible for. So I wanted to kind of show you where we've been and celebrate those successes, and then show you where we are going next. So we were tasked first off with creating that job description for an RTI coordinator. That was completed. We handed that off, and now we moved into we've already been created as our instructional team, so that's us. We're the instructional team. So those two things we have accomplished with the action steps that we've been tasked with. Where we left off in the spring was that we were working to really define each tier and then identify the resources that would meet the academic and social emotional needs of all students. And that was what we were working on when we left in the spring. And that's kind of where tonight we're hoping to kind of wrap that component up, because you all provided the input for whose responsibility within each. We defined the tiers, then we defined who we thought responsibility rested with each of those steps and actions and tiers. And so then we took your information that you provided us and tried to organize it in a way that would be meaningful to anyone that was using it. So that's kind of where we are right now, is just making sure that you see your work in this handbook, and that we've clearly outlined what we had decided on in the spring. The other thing that we are tasked to do is to identify those benchmark assessments and the progress monitoring tools for measuring the academic and social emotional growth. And again, that was kind of our spring task. We started slightly on looking at what resources we had, but again, we were interrupted. So that's where we're heading next, and where we are working towards with our action. And then finally, we did have a goal for Q2. We were to be working on developing that system of training, then based on what we decided and how we defined our tiers and how we defined whose responsibility those rested with, we then were to look at developing a system of training. we have actually made a new target for that just because of the interruption that we had last spring. And so our new target for that, we're really only off by about a quarter. So I think we're in a really good place to work on that. And Christopher and I were kind of discussing what that might look like for us going forward. And we see that as our March task that we will work on to start to identify what we see as needs and then develop a framework that we could then deliver to the district so that we can work on getting that put into place. And then notice steps 6 and 7. Those will actually start next fall with building structures that ensure implementation of all those tiers and what we have outlined in our handbook. And then again, notice that number 7, we are looking to identify how we're going to manage the data. So that's where we're going. That's where we've been. And we have a couple of tasks tonight to keep us moving forward with those responsibilities. Are there any questions at this point before I move forward? I know I kind of jumped in, going fast. Thoughts, questions? And here I'm going to pull the chat so I can actually see it. Did everybody have a chance to get access to the presentation? Those of you that joined late, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in just in case you weren't able to access that. So I just dropped it into the chat. Any questions, comments, thoughts since our last time together? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. So one of the things that we wanted to be sure everyone was able to kind of pencil in for our next meeting, the hope is for it to be March 25th. Again, the 4 to 6, we will most likely be doing that virtually, but who knows? Maybe we'll all be vaccinated and we'll all be able to be together. But as of this point, we are March 25th, 4 to 6 virtually, and we will send out a calendar invite with the details going forward for that. And remember then, March 25th will be that time that we can work on identifying those professional development needs that we see moving forward so that we can then be prepared to ensure that buildings have the structures in place to support the RTI model. All right, so as we mentioned, we had been working on defining those tiers and identifying who was responsible for the work within those tiers. And so we were working from a handbook. And so this handbook has now been updated with the information that we worked on last spring. And it's actually divided out into 3 parts. So part 1 is all of the things that would require us to implement an RTI system, or what's necessary in being successful in an RTI system. So that's what part 1 includes. And then in part 2, we added an academic framework and assessment information. So what does our Shawnee mission framework look like to be able to support an RTI system? And that would include those problem-solving measures and those steps that we take when we are working through that RTI system. And then finally, there's going to be that part 3 piece, that's the research-based resources. And we didn't quite get to that when we were working on it last spring, so that's what we will also be working to add to and add the resources to that particular section. So in this handbook, we are asking now for you all to take a look at it, and here we're going to do that in a minute, and I'll give you some directions and details as to how we might do that. But when we work through that, some of the things that we want you to think about and to be considering are think about what the purpose of this document is. So does the purpose, is it clear as the purpose, and will it support and really provide meaningful information for any of our users who will pick it up and look at it to start designing their building RTI systems. And so really be thinking about, when you're looking at the document with that lens, thinking about what is the purpose and is it clear what the purpose of the document is. And then kind of be thinking about, who are the stakeholders? Who's going to be looking at this document, and does it provide the information for those stakeholders and those people that would be using the document? Because we want to be clear and we want to make sure that it is user-friendly for everyone that will be using it. And then just kind of, what is the document actually saying to us? Are you getting the idea? Are you getting the theme? To be able to implement the RTI systems within our buildings and really have this system-wide framework across all levels of the district. So we're really looking for some really valuable comments that you will add to the Google Doc. So in the presentation, I believe that we have a link in that presentation for you to take a look at that document. And actually, I'm going to stop and be a little bit abrupt right now. Christopher Villarreal is here, and I'd like to introduce him. He is my partner in this work. And so, Christopher, if there was anything that you would like to add that, as you've kind of jumped in late, please feel free to add any information.
Yeah, no, I got here just as you were beginning to explain what our first task is for today, and I think you really covered it well. And so just one of the things, as you are adding your comments to that handbook for student success, really focus on those questions that Krista posed to you, and not so much on looking for mistakes or errors, because we'll go back through and kind of find that stuff later, but we really want more feedback about the content of the document and whether or not we are effectively establishing a framework for a systemic approach to an RTI system. And as Krista was saying, the link for the handbook is actually on the slide just before this one, and you also have it in the calendar invite that Krista sent you guys yesterday and the email that I sent the day before yesterday. So we will take the next, what time is it right now? 4:18. So we'll take the next, I'll say 27 minutes. So that puts us at 4:45. So if you want to mute your computer, stop your video, and then just take the next 27 minutes to really get into that document and start reading through what's there and thinking about those questions that Krista just posed, and adding your comments and feedback, reading the comments and feedback from others and responding to them as well, I think is going to be really valuable. And Krista and I will be here just kind of watching along in the Google Doc as you guys go through and add some of those comments. And she and I have time planned together before our next meeting to resolve all of those comments and make some changes to the handbook based on the feedback that we get from you. So if you need to take a break or whatever as well when you're doing that, or if you're at home and you have to let your dog out or whatever, you do your thing. But we will be back here ready to touch base with you guys and transition to another activity for today at 4:45. Any questions before you get started?
This is Pam Palermo. I have a question. I read through the document earlier and very impressed with everything you guys did, but I noticed that like grades 3 through whatever, when they were talking about the assessment piece, they only mentioned dibbles at the beginning of the year. And I know that with the new push for all of the dyslexia training and all the things that we just went through, that they're talking about that like being more a part of what we do throughout the year and not just the beginning of the year. So are those the kind of comments you want, or is it literally just directed at, yes, it's understandable, I think people could read it, and understand the framework?
Yeah, any insights that you have like that would be great to put in there because, again, as we're doing this, we're trying to prepare this to be something that we can pass out to building leaders and building leadership teams that they can really see as a practical and useful guide. So we want to make sure that the information in there is as comprehensive as possible. So if you see gaps in information, you can note that as well as you're making your comments. And another quick point, if you are outside of our organization, so if you don't have a Shawnee Mission email address, just request access, and I'm going to minimize the screen here when you guys get started, and I'll go through and grant access to anybody from outside of the organization, so that way you can add your comments as well.
Any other questions? All right, so we will follow along, and I will I've gotten some messages. I will send the link as well to some of you that do not have the chat. So I will do that now.
Thank you.
It is 4:45, so I'm going to ask you guys all to come back to the whole group now, and we will have a discussion on your opportunity to preview the new handbook. So some of you were able to add your comments to the handbook, and that's great. So Krista and I will review that information, like I said, before our next meeting and make some changes based on that information. But we also wanted to have just a short discussion with you guys about those questions that Krista posed before you started looking at the document. So those questions are pretty simple looking in nature. What is the purpose of this document? Who is this document for? And what is the document really saying? But I want to just ask you guys your opinions and take some notes so that way we have a little bit more feedback on the document as we look at making some changes. So we're going to start with that first question. What is the purpose of this document? And in answering the question, I really want to emphasize that I'm not looking for a right answer. I'm looking for, after going through the document yourself, who do you think this, or what do you think the purpose of this document is? So after looking at it, you feel like the purpose of this document is blank. It is your opinion, your experience in looking at the document. There is no right or wrong answer, and I'm just going to be taking notes on what people say. So that way Krista and I can then go through and kind of process through this information and make changes accordingly based on the feedback that we get. So that is the first question. What is the purpose of in your exploration? What do you think the purpose of this document is? What do you feel the purpose of this document is? And I'm looking for probably 4 or 5 answers to this question. So different opinions and ideas about the purpose of the document.
Well, I felt it was very explanatory in nature, and I felt the purpose was to explain the district's vision of not only RTI, but the systems that we're working on putting in place. I felt that somebody reading the document would really understand what the goal is as we move forward with the RTI process.
Okay,
And to add to her comment, go ahead. To add to her comment,
no, go ahead.
Just making this and consistent across all of our buildings, because I feel like sometimes it may not be from building to building, and this right here is something that everyone can refer to and have no question about what's negotiable and what's non-negotiable.
And again, adding to that, I think it adds to fidelity to the program. When we all have the same document, we can go back and look at, and maybe Kristen, that's the same thing you were just saying, but making sure that we know the steps and we can always go back and refer if we're confused as to what comes next or we do next. So there's fidelity there.
And I would just add to that, I really see this as a kind of almost a working guide book, or I know it says handbook, but to guide our teacher teams, whether it's a PLC team, I know I'm being redundant with the language, but whether it's a PLC team, a grade level band team, as they start to implement like their PLC work, tier 1 instruction, the standards, and then how they start to select students for intervention. I mean, this really, to me, guides that whole process and is a great resource for those teams to use.
So far, this is really great feedback, and I really like, I'm just picking on Lisa because she was the one who spoke most recently, but I really like the idea of maybe changing it to guidebook instead of handbook. I kind of like the way that sounds, and it makes it almost feel more actionable that way. So we've had 4 pieces of feedback for this first question, so I'm gonna shoot for 5. One more to close us out, and we'll jump to the next question.
I'll piggyback off of what Lisa said, that I think that it's also useful for anyone new to the district, whether it be a first-year teacher or an experienced teacher from another district coming in that maybe does not have as much familiarity with the RTI system. This gives them a nice starting point with that framework, as well as our operating procedures in Shawnee Mission with regards to RTI.
It actually works as a quick segue to the next question, because the next question at 4. So in answering this question, I would be curious to hear what you guys think. And I know Erin just shared a little bit of this, and Lisa touched on this as well in her response. But who do you think is going to have and use this document, and in what way do you see them using it? So for this one, because we've kind of touched on some of these ideas already, let's just go for 3 responses.
I could see potentially using this with parents as you're working with a student through the RTI process, and explaining to parents, this is the basically trail we're going to take in supporting your child, be it in them needing academic supports to come up to grade level, or in them needing supports to potentially, if they're exceeding their grade level standards, how we're going to step by step. I think it does a good job of explaining it in terms to parents that are fairly accessible.
I agree with that. I think it was very thorough and very just even the definition of terms. I think that it would be very useful for a parent to see, because I know I get a lot of questions about the intervention process and what that looks like. And that's the first thing I thought of, was that this would be a great tool. I'm not sure if that was the intent, but I thought that for some of our parents, this would be a wonderful tool to share.
And I'm going to ask 2 questions stemming from your response. Jennifer, one being just because it's you responding, but I know that Darcy and I had spent some time with your school psychs in the past. Do you feel like this would be a valuable resource for them, and in what way?
Absolutely. I think number 1, also to share with parents, but then number 2, when we're talking about students in the problem solving process, or just the RTI process, to make sure, it could help with accountability, I feel like, as well. Here are the options that we have available. Here is the process that we go through. We need to make sure that how we can drill down, dig down. Yes, I think absolutely it would be helpful for them as well, whether it's working with parents or working with intervention teams.
And then we've had, in answering this question, we've had a few different mentions of this being used with parents, and we do have some parents on our team, and I know that we have a couple here with us today, so I'd be curious to hear from any of our parent representatives that are here with us today, if you if you do, from a parent perspective, feel like this document is parent friendly, and in what ways can we make it more parent friendly?
So I think a greater discussion on the outcomes of these efforts might be warranted in the document. I see a lot of the assessments, collection of data, the steps, the actionable plan. But if we were to, just open the conversation up with parents or with me as a parent on what is the outcome of this effort, that might be very beneficial and also might gain more buy-in and support for the activities within. And it could be a gamut of outcomes. It could be, happy path. What happens if things don't go according to plan? What are the various outcomes that typically occur as part of the RTI process?
Awesome. That's great feedback. Any of our other parents that are here with us today before we move on? All right, then the last big reflective question is, what is the document really saying? And I want to kind of think about the flip side of that question as we answer this. And instead of saying, what is the document really saying? What is the document not saying? At this point, we did an exercise like this early on in this team where we said, what it says and what it doesn't say. And Krista and I and Darcy, while she was still with us, oh, gosh, that makes it sound like she's dead. She's not dead, you guys. I just saw her last week. But what is the document not saying? Because we spent some time going through that feedback that you gave us the last time about what it says and what it doesn't what it says and what it doesn't say, and made some changes based on that feedback. And so now we have a more, I think, robust and actionable document. But what is still perhaps unsaid that we can add more information to or more clarity to?
Piggybacking, this is Pam, piggybacking a little bit off what Rodney said about outcomes and things, I think it does a good job of laying out the process. Here are the assessments we use, and here's what happens in tier one, and here's who's responsible. I don't see kind of more of, I'm going to call it a flow chart, where like we're in tier one and here's where we go to tier two, and here's where we go to tier three, and here's where we go back, which is what Rodney was alluding to. The results, if we're in tier one and they're not successful, then here's what happens next. And then if there are gaps that are found based on the assessment, then here's when we move to tier three. I just think maybe putting it in that flow chart would make it meet what Rodney was talking about really seeing what the outcomes are that are expected, and why that movement happens, what drives us to move the students based on the results of the assessments.
Well, and if we're working with parents and we're using this document to show how we're helping their kids, along with that flowchart idea, there needs to be an understanding that just because they hit tier 3 for one skill or one set of standards, it doesn't mean that they're always going to be there. It's not like it's a permanent label. Your child is a tier 3 student. So I think something about how people can move between the different tiers as interventions work or as the content shifts would be good also. 'Cause I know that's why a lot of people hesitate almost with seeing if an IEP or something is needed because they don't want their child to have that label. So we need to make sure that tier 3 doesn't become a negative label.
In this question and thinking about this question, I feel like we have kind of taken a really specific path right now to talking about parents as users of this document, but think about what information might be missing for building leaders, for building leadership teams, for teachers that are using this. Any feedback specific to those stakeholders as well, and then we'll move on.
I don't think it says who is providing the interventions. So when you're talking about tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3, who is the responsible party for providing those interventions? And that might go a long way in helping clarify things for families as well. That if tier 3 is being if that intervention is being provided by a reading specialist or an innovation specialist, that's different than an intervention being provided by a special education teacher.
As I looked over the document, one thing that jumped out at me as glaring that was missing was social emotional information. So what assessments do we have for social emotional? What are the steps for the tiers for social emotional support and helping kids in that way? So I think that's something that we need to look at and make sure they're included as part of our RTI process as well.
That's a good point to make as well. With our upcoming KISA evaluation, they are asking questions specifically about social emotional support in the state of the pandemic. So it would be helpful for us to include more of that information in this document because it's best practice regardless of whether we're in a pandemic or not. So that's a really good point. Okay, this discussion was really valuable, and I appreciate you guys really putting some thought into the document and into reviewing the document. And you've given us some good information to think about and consider as we look at working toward what will hopefully be the final version of this document. So with that, I am going to pass it back over to Krista, and she's going to get you guys set up on our next activity for today. So Krista, put on a show for these kind folks.
All right. So here's the show. So I had created groups for us to go into the next activity and task that we're going to do. However, we've had some membership changes as far as like who's here and who's not. And so I really adjusted the groups. So what I want to just share ahead of time is the fact that I've created these breakout sessions. I'm going to share my screen so that we can kind of go through what we're going to do next. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my breakout session. So keep your fingers crossed that I've done this well and that my breakout sessions will still work even though we haven't started them yet. So we are going to share my screen so that we can. So the next piece, and I think based on some of the feedback that you all were sharing about the document and its purpose and who it supports, I think some of that piece, especially Erin, you were mentioning like who provides the intervention. And while this isn't necessarily going to delineate that tonight, it definitely is going to get us to start thinking about, well, who potentially could provide the intervention and what resources do we have in place right now in our buildings, in our district that would allow for us to support all students in any tier that they are in. So this is a task that we're going to look at. This is a task that we're going to look at where we're going to do a little resource mapping. And that mapping is going to involve us just kind of doing somewhat of a brain dump in the sense that we are going to just think about all the available resources that we currently have in our buildings. And so what is your current reality? And this could be your available personnel, the facilities that you have, any resources and curricular supports that we have, the time that we have, any data that we have. So you're going to kind of be thinking about this and kind of just dumping all this information onto this document. Our goal for this is to eventually put together a worksheet of sorts that our building leadership teams and our administrators could use to support themselves to identify where their resources are, who might provide those interventions in those different tiers. So again, this is just for us to kind of just list out what you currently have, what your current reality is. I tried to form your groups such that you were in elementary groups as well as secondary groups, because knowing our resources and our facilities and everything that's available to us looks a little bit different across the grade levels. So that's kind of how the groups are set apart. What we are going to do here in a minute, I'm going to ask that you, in the presentation that I shared with you, if you will go to this slide in your presentation where it says breakout groups. I quickly changed them around from what I had originally planned. We do not have 10 groups. We only have 4 groups right now. So find your name, and then when you, and I'll just kind of show you where I'm going with this. Hopefully. So you'll see that the great breakout groups look like this, and you'll find your name to see what group you're in so that you can then touch on the link right here that will take you to the document that your group is going to kind of list out and brainstorm all the resources that you have available to you. So if you do not see your name on here, please let me know, or just choose a group and go to that group. And then I might have to change you in our breakout rooms to put you there. Some of you weren't showing up in my participant list, so hopefully I did capture everyone. But if I didn't, again, please let me know. So going kind of back to our task, the goal is for us to think about all of the resources that we have currently available to us, and try to think outside of the box. Don't keep yourself within the constraints of what we typically think of, but be creative in this, and as you're thinking about what available resources we have. And again, then finally, our goal will be to build a worksheet that people could use to help identify this within their own buildings. So let's see how I do on my breakout, creating my breakouts. All right, so let's see, because I did actually. I think let's make sure that I'm doing this right. I think when I did that, I may have lost my, oh, no, I didn't, sorry. I'm sitting here going underneath all these tabs. Okay, so I'm going to get ready right now. I'm going to start the breakout session. It's going to put you in your groups. Your task is to find your name on that sheet, touch on that group link so that you can get to the document you need to get to, and then start thinking through, brainstorming, just dump it all. There's no wrong or right, kind of just put it all out there, what we have available, and then we will pull you back together. So Christopher, is there anything else that you wanted to add or want to put a time frame on this? We're at 5:07, so do we want to say about 20 minutes?
I think, I think 20 minutes should work for this task. And just as you're doing it, like she said, there's no right or wrong answer, and you're going to have different people with different resources available to them in their buildings. List them all, because what we're trying to do is get an idea of what's available, so then we can kind of, we're going to work backwards from what you guys provide to us today to then put together a little bit of a template that building leadership teams can use to say, like, here's a category of a resource. What do we have available? But we want to populate those categories based on the resources that you guys share with us today. So hopefully that made sense. But yes, that's what I have to add. And I think maybe even we'll say 22 minutes, so we come back at 5:30.
Perfect. It is. We will come back at 5:30, and I'm going to touch start breakout, so we will see you soon. All right, it looks like everybody is coming back. Welcome back. I think we've got everyone. Okay. Well, welcome back. I enjoyed being able to kind of sit in and listen to your conversations and your brainstorm, adding all of those resources. So, as we kind of think about that task and think about moving forward with that resource mapping and thinking about what we have available to us, would you say that as you were going through it, did you find that we have a comprehensive understanding of the resources we have available for our students? What kind of discussions came out as you were thinking about what resources we do have available to us?
Our reading list is a lot longer than our math and SEL list.
And that was in the elementary world. Go ahead. I hear someone. Thought I was interrupting someone. Any other thoughts about kind of our comprehensive resources, what we have available to us? Was that easy for you to do? Was it difficult? I mean, I think the idea that our reading in elementary especially is definitely fairly robust. Secondary thoughts on the resources you have available to you?
We know what we have. It's just the idea of those remediation and those resources you would use to catch up. It's much harder to find at the secondary level. So that's an area that we kind of need more help on, I think.
Okay. And when you say you know what you have, would you say that it's you don't know what you don't know, or would you say that you've looked and we just can't seem to find?
I would say we don't know what we don't know. I don't know honestly what's out there, what's available. I know a lot of attention gets put on reading because if they can't read, math is equally as hard. But I don't know what's out there. I just feel like there has to be something out there. I don't know if we just haven't found it yet.
Okay.
I know in our group we didn't specifically state it, but I just wonder feelings on, because we do have such a robust list of reading resources, if there's confusion on when to use which ones and which populations.
That's a great point.
And under that, I know, Krista, we used to have, and you had started to put together again, kind of a resource guide as far as if the student is struggling with this, here are different things that we have that align with that need. I think updating or recreating or just polishing what we have in that respect would be nice, because I think a lot of times the research, and I know I've worked with a lot of people who have ELL kids who are not reading through third grade and up, and they're not reading because they have a gap in instruction. Like, we have that phonics for reading. Most people don't even know it exists. And so they see a need, but they don't have any idea. If they don't know the right person to ask, they may not know where the resources are or what resource would work.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I did actually today, those are on the website. So we are going to link those into the RTI guidebook or handbook so that we can definitely direct people to and we even have kind of the student profile of what their data might look like, what they might be showing you, and then where to go next. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Chris, did you have something like that for math, or is it just for reading? Because I know you did a great job with reading.
Right now, we definitely just have the elementary reading, but we can absolutely, that could be a goal for us to flesh that out for math as well. So as we go forward too, and we kind of have discussed this, and Kylie, I think you brought that up, the fact that what resource gaps that we have that we should address systemically. Was there any other thoughts in regards to that in our gaps?
We had a little bit of conversation in our group about what is a resource to be used as an intervention and what's more of a tool for teachers too, and knowing the difference between the two, because some of the resources we talked about serve more of a purpose as of an intervention, where some might not be, but they are still a valuable resource.
Great point.
I might also add that most of our reading resources are aligned to foundational skills, and we do not have interventions around like language comprehension for students.
Okay.
Krista, I heard you ask the question at the beginning of, do we have a comprehensive understanding of them? I think that would be an appropriate next step too, is even once we know that they're there, you know, do we know how to use them and what their purpose is? I think would be a huge next step too.
Perfect.
And I would
That
agree
might
with that
limit
too.
space.
Uh-oh.
I was just saying that would lend itself to the training piece. It's wonderful to have the resources, but if the people in the building haven't trained, they may not know how to apply them.
And that was what I was just going to follow up with at the high school level. We do have some, we have big ideas, and we have Pearson, and we have some of those, not across every content, but in certain areas. But I think learning how to leverage those materials for the intervention piece of it too. The first kind of rollout has happened where we're using them in the main instruction in Tier 1, but how do we now leverage some of those additional aspects of those resources to support some intervention work?
And
Okay,
I was just going to mention too, we were talking about how there wasn't as much of the social emotional piece of it that we were in the guidebook. Interesting as we were talking about the resources. I'm at Horizons High School, which is our alternative high school. And what I'm thinking about is, like, we have a lot of resources in that social emotional piece. But maybe not quite as much in those reading and math aspect of helping our students, because we focus so much on that social emotional. So the classroom teachers having that ability, because like I mentioned in our group, we are technically Tier 3 for the district in some regards, but in our own school, we have our Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. So maybe getting to see what are those other reading and math interventions that we can help to go along with the social emotional.
Thank you. Nice. I hope, Christopher, you're catching all of this.
I don't know if you could nodding vigorously. Yes, I am.
Thank you. Okay, so kind of building from there, would we, as you were having those discussions and thinking about the different resources that we have available, or that the gaps that we might have, could we confidently say that our resources are accessible to all learners? So, sometimes we tend to think of some of the resources, if it's a Tier 3 resource, it's only available to our identified students, or so would you say generally we have resources accessible to all our learners?
I would. If teachers know how to use it, they can use it for everybody. I think the training on how to use them further is a big issue to look at. But I mean, if teachers know what to do, then yes, all students have access.
And I would echo Pam in saying, and if they know that they exist in the first place. So I think it's twofold: knowing that they're available, and then also the training to go with it.
And then finally, just kind of thinking through us as a system and our strengths in exercising evidence-based, culturally responsive instruction. Are there areas in that we need to think about as we kind of develop this system and develop our resources that we have.
Krista, can I go back for just a second about the resources being accessible to all learners? I think our group talked about some inconsistencies with regards to programming that might help differentiate instruction for learners. So if you have a PTA that's able to purchase a program like IXL for your school, your learners may have more opportunities to receive some support at a particular tier than a student at a building who maybe doesn't have that added resource. So I would agree that we have equal access to district purchased resources, but I do think that there's inequity across the district with regards to additional resources to meet the needs of our learners.
Okay.
Well, and I also think that also speaks to like programming, because I do see across the district at different, particularly at secondary schools, what I would call intervention classes are or are not available from, say, one middle school to the next or one high school to the next. So implementation does vary widely.
Okay, thank you for that. Those are all very helpful in helping us move forward with what we have and building this system so that we do have that equitable access to it. Amy, I appreciated the way you also added the implementation piece of it. So not only the stuff, but the implementation of it as well. So that was a great add-on to that. So I think going forward, and Christopher, if you have something else you want to add, go ahead and do that now. But going forward, our plan would be, again, for that March 25th date. So save that date. And the hope would be that we can now start to identify some of those areas, which we kind of started to tonight. So I appreciated that. I think that's going to help us move forward in identifying those areas for PD needs around district-wide and where we can go forward with that. So thank you so much. Christopher, was there anything that you wanted to add? Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I was not here when you talked about our next steps as a group. Did you share with them the conversation that we had with Dr. Hubbard about that action step?
We putting it off to Q3 and the fact that we would look at identifying needs and kind of putting forth a framework, but then putting that to whoever our new professional development resource would be.
Yeah, perfect. I just wanted to say that if you hadn't already said it, but you already did. So in the meantime, before we meet again, have that in the back of your mind. And as you have conversations with your teams, with your staff members, with those around you, bring up PD, bring up what some of the needs might be, ask them what they know about the RTI system in a way that doesn't feel confrontational, of course, just to see if you can gauge from some of our stakeholders what they might need as far as PD goes around this system, so that when we come to the table in March, we have a little bit of a starting point for that conversation with some input from some folks that maybe aren't necessarily on this team.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's it. I think we're done. We're a whole 15 minutes early that you get back. So thank you. What Krista was about to say, I stole it from her. So I thank you guys first. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was good to see everyone.
Thank you.
Sorry for cutting you off. I didn't mean to.
You are totally fine. You didn't cut me off. I'm going to call you real quick, just so we can talk about next steps, and then I'm going to get out of this building. So I'll call you in a second.
Okay. Thanks, Clayton. Bye.